What's up, guys? I'm DK Wrestler, and you're about to view our second installment of our 40 Years of WrestleMania podcast. And if you haven't seen part one yet that had released yesterday, definitely check it out where we go through, I believe, the first 22 or 23 WrestleManias, give our opinions of them. And in this part that you're watching right now, which is part two, we are going to be going through the rest of the WrestleManias that we didn't cover in part one, give our opinions of them, and then we're actually going to end off by having myself and my co-host MD Shady discuss our top five favorite WrestleManias that have occurred. So without further ado, let's continue off this podcast and talk about the rest of the WrestleMania events.
So next up is WrestleMania 23, April 1st, 2007 at Ford Field in Detroit, Michigan. This WrestleMania, the main event was Shawn Michaels versus John Cena for the WWE Championship. We had the Royal Rumble winner Undertaker go up against Batista for the World Heavyweight Championship. That's a very underrated match. No one really talks about Batista versus Undertaker. And I remember I had a couple buddies over, their names were Jimmy and Steven, and they came over to my dad's place to watch this, and they were telling me, just watch, Undertaker's losing against Batista in this match. And I'm like, no, Undertaker's winning. So we ended up seeing Undertaker. So Jimmy and Steven, if you so happen to listen to this, you, I was right. So this WrestleMania was also the Battle of the Billionaires. So Donald Trump versus Mr. McMahon, but both having a representative being Bobby Lashley versus Umaga. And the loser, the person would have their head shaved, which Vince McMahon had his head shaved. Of course, Stone Cold had to join in on the fun there. Kane versus the Great Khali. I don't know why I remember this, but that's for some reason one match I remember. There was also the Money in the Bank ladder match with a lot of stacked top guys. There was Edge, Randy Orton. I think both Hardy Boys were in this match. And then there's also the winner being Mr. Kennedy, who actually never ended up catching in and was forced to vacate it to Edge. Overall, this was a pretty decent WrestleMania. And this also, like, starting off with this Batista match for Undertaker was going to be a huge, like, 7-year stretch of, like, the best Undertaker streak matches you see.
Yeah, this is a really good WrestleMania, and this is actually the WrestleMania where, after the WrestleMania, I had gone to my first and only ever time going to a WWE live event, being the WrestleMania Revenge Tour that I watched in Hamilton, Ontario at the Cops Coliseum. So yeah, this is really good, and I remember, of course, hair versus hair match with Umaga and Bobby Lashley being the representatives of course, Donald Trump and Vince McMahon. And I remember telling my mom, like, oh, like, there's no way that Vince is gonna lose, and my mom's like, well, no, he is, because Donald Trump wears a toupee. And I couldn't really understand that, like, Donald Trump really doesn't have real hair to shave off, so it wasn't going to get shaved off. So she kind of already, like, read between the lines there, and then of course she ended up being right. But yeah, this is a really, really good WrestleMania. And yeah, I feel like DK is definitely right about, people don't talk about Batista versus Undertaker enough, and that was for the heavyweight title too, right? Yeah, so that was a great match. I feel like they're like perfect to wrestle each other, and their build up for that WrestleMania was really solid as well.
And now that reminds me, imagine had Vince McMahon won that match, we wouldn't get the menace known as Do-Rag Vince. Anyways, moving on to WrestleMania 24. Took place on March 30th, 2008 at the Citrus Bowl in Orlando, Florida. I forget what it's called now because they did go back to that venue later on for a WrestleMania. So the main event of this was Undertaker versus Edge for the World Heavyweight Championship. There was also the triple threat match for the WWE Championship with John Cena, Triple H, and Randy Orton, which this was the year where John Cena came back so many months early, and this is what dubs like the John Cena healing powers, where he comes back so early from injury and wasn't even expected to return on time, ends up winning the Rumble, and then in the same case as like Rey Mysterio, like loses his opportunity and then ends up making a triple threat match. This also had Big Show versus Floyd Money Mayweather, and this also had the match of the career-threatening match of Ric Flair versus Shawn Michaels, that infamous moment. Talk about moments that are engraved in your mind of, I'm sorry, I love you, super kick, 1, 2, 3, and Rick crying. That could have been the main event of WrestleMania, realistically, with that moment. I want to say Batista wrestled Umaga. I think that was actually a match that happened, and this was also the WrestleMania. We had, obviously, a Money in the Bank ladder match, but one thing I remember, it was the first of two for CM Punk winning, but this is the match where I believe John Morrison does the moonsault off the top with the ladder in his arms. And this was also the WrestleMania where Kane beats Chavo Guerrero in like 18 seconds for the ECW title.
Yeah, this WrestleMania was really good. Of course, with Taker and Edge, I wanted Edge to win so bad. And of course, he did not win and beat the streak, which is okay because I don't think that Edge should have been that guy to do that. Anyways, but yeah, this was a really, really good WrestleMania. I think this might be the first Mania that I actually watched like live. Like I got to go watch it somewhere. I forget where I was. Rick and Sean. I mean, again, one of those WrestleMania moments and is a huge tearjerker and such a beautiful, amazing moment. And then Ric Flair goes and ruins it because he ends up not really retiring and he does matches elsewhere. But besides that point, the whole I'm sorry, I love you is just one of my favorite moments in wrestling. It's so beautiful, so sad.
Next up is WrestleMania 25, happened April 5th, 2009 at Reliance Stadium in Houston, Texas, which I believe this is the same venue as Astrodome, just a different name from WrestleMania 17. Main event for this match was Randy Orton versus Triple H for the WWE Championship. This was where we famously see what many people regard as the greatest WrestleMania match of all time between Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker. This WrestleMania also had the triple threat match for the World Heavyweight title with John Cena, Big Show, and Edge, which a lot of people were mad about the fact that we never got a singles match between Edge and John Cena at Mania and that Big Show somehow was inserted. I just remember that this was not entirely the greatest WrestleMania in my mind. There were some cool matches, obviously, like Shawn and Taker.
Yeah, this WrestleMania wasn't great. I believe I also watched this one because now I'm like a diehard wrestling fan at this point. And I remember being so pissed off at that John Cena, Big Show, and Edge match. And because that's the spot where Cena has Big Show and Edge up for the attitude adjustment and hits them both with it. I'm like, and being such a big fan of Edge, and of course, a huge mark for John Cena too. But watching that happen was painful, so painful. So that was definitely my biggest takeaway from that Mania. But part one of Shawn versus Taker at Mania is unreal. What a great match! And of course, this is like now the time where Undertaker is like having some of his best matches of all time at WrestleMania for the next 3 years, I guess.
Next up is WrestleMania 26, happened March 28th, 2010 at the University of Phoenix Stadium in Glendale, Arizona. Such a random place to have a WrestleMania, but at least it's a new place. So the main event, arguably so, because it should have been the main event the year prior, Undertaker versus Shawn Michaels. This time around is the streak versus career match, which we've seen Undertaker win. Shawn Michaels officially retires until and ruins it by having a stupid tag team match that in Saudi Arabia. This was also the WrestleMania with Batista versus John Cena for the WWE Championship. Edge had won the Royal Rumble that year and faced Chris Jericho for the World Heavyweight title. This is unfortunately where like 10 minutes of my life I want back, where it was Bret Hart versus Vince McMahon in a match that was just absolutely terrible. This also had, I believe, Rey Mysterio versus CM Punk. I'm just remembering off the top of my head. This is the WrestleMania with the Money in the Bank ladder match where Jack Swagger won, which I didn't really care about. Overall, we are currently in a stretch of WrestleManias where the overall product wasn't entirely the greatest, but there were some banger matches like Taker versus Shawn that definitely deserved to be the main event that year. And now, as I'm remembering off the top of my head, there was that legacy triple threat match with Randy Orton, Cody Rhodes, and Ted DiBiase Jr.
Right. Yeah, I would say this isn't one of the best Manias, but again, on card, this one looks amazing. This looks like a wicked WrestleMania, but it didn't really end up going that way because of many reasons. But yeah, part two, Shawn versus Taker, is definitely the takeaway from this Mania. The end of Shawn's career, technically. I mean, his in-ring career, at least, again, besides that Saudi match. But just an amazing one. And then it leads up to the next two WrestleManias where Shawn's technically still a part of the whole Taker story.
Next up is WrestleMania 27, April 3rd, 2011 at the Georgia Dome in Atlanta, Georgia. And I kind of want to say, realistically, this is the worst WrestleMania I've ever watched. Overall, there was only one great match of this card. There was one good match, which I will say that good match was CM Punk versus Randy Orton, but that great match was Triple H versus Undertaker in the no holds barred match. The main event was fucking garbage with John Cena versus The Miz, where near the end, Miz gets concussed by hitting his head off the freaking concrete from the barricade, and that The Rock kind of took the spotlight away from the main event to obviously set up once in a lifetime turned into twice in a lifetime at some point, but still, it was just garbage. The matches were just so weird in the deciding factors. Like, example, like, I guess the Edge versus Del Rio match was all right, but hindsight, like, did Edge need to win when realistically he was retiring the next night? The Triple H Undertaker match storyline aspect was so great, and I believe, little fact check, I could be wrong, but I think I'm right about this. This is actually the last time we ever see Undertaker do the over-the-top rope dive. He would never do this in any of his matches after that. And I love, like, I believe after that, they crashed into, like, the Michael Cole coal mine box and, like, broke it. And also, yeah, another terrible match of this WrestleMania, Michael Cole versus Jerry Lawler with, like, Jack Swagger. Not even Stone Cold Steve Austin, who was the referee, could save this match. It was so awful. No Money in the Bank ladder match at this WrestleMania or any other WrestleManias because they made the pay-per-view at this point. But back to that Undertaker Triple H match, the highlight. The match was so good, and especially one of the most unique endings to a match that I have ever seen, where the winner of the match could not stand on his own 2 feet, but the loser can, which ultimately built up to the next match they would have at WrestleMania, where this time around, everyone's always wanting an Undertaker streak match and wanting to challenge it, but now it's Undertaker reaching out like, hey, you may have thought I won, but in my mind, I didn't win, and that I want a match with you next year. And then the build-up for that was just absolutely amazing. We'll get to it for the next year, but, like, that was so amazing. Like, if that was the main event and that's what we saw as the ending, that would have been a an awesome way to end WrestleMania. And honestly, I would probably not say that, like, this wouldn't have been the worst WrestleMania.
Yeah, this is not a great WrestleMania, but of course, I will talk about Triple H and Undertaker because, yeah, that match was so good. And yeah, a lot of people do talk about how Taker was the one who couldn't leave the ring, even though he won the match. And then, like DK said, where that now gets the build up for the next WrestleMania, where Taker is the one wanting to challenge Triple H. Triple H is like, no, like, I'm not gonna fight you again because, like, I kind of won that match, and obviously he didn't win the match, but he's like, well, I did a really good job, but he didn't win. And then, of course, the story progresses where they would fight at the next WrestleMania. So, yeah, that is just amazing storytelling and just such a chronicle, just so good. And then it leads up to one of the most beautiful moments at the next WrestleMania. So let's get right into that.
First of all, I'm popping huge on. I definitely could tell you were referencing wrestling isn't wrestling with that Triple H quote. But yeah, next WrestleMania 28, April 1st, 2012, Sun Life Stadium in Miami, Florida. This WrestleMania was fucking amazing. We go from having such a terrible WrestleMania to such an amazing WrestleMania. And I have a lot of memories because MD was at my place, our buddy Robbie that we mentioned earlier was at my place, and my next door neighbor was over at our place. And this was one of the first times I actually, like, ordered a pay-per-view, like, off of, like, the cable site. And actually, funny story, we actually missed the first match. Little did we know the first match would be Daniel Bryan versus Sheamus, where it ends in 18 seconds with Sheamus winning. Although I know that MD was excited because he loved Sheamus at that time. So it's like, yeah, I won the title. Like, I remember, like, being really excited for Kane versus Randy Orton. Like, Kane had just gotten the mask back. There was also the match of, like, Team Teddy versus Team Johnny. A lot of the banger ones I'll talk about. First off, we got to get into this. Undertaker versus Triple H in a Hell in a Cell match with Shawn Michaels as the special guest referee. Already Triple H and Undertaker had great entrances, and especially you had that reveal because they teased it in, like, the vignettes of, like, every time I'm waiting for you to, like, accept my challenge, I'm, like, basically teasing of cutting his hair. And so when he lifts his hood and, like, he had, like, the faux hawk, I'm like, that's crazy because I wasn't actually thinking he cut his hair, but kind of fits Undertaker at this point. But not only that, the Hell in a Cell match itself, or the Hell in a Cell structure itself, had its own entrance. And the fact that I can remember it was Memory Remains by Metallica. That was the entrance. And I remember even seeing that match from time to time again. Like, I get chills seeing the Cell get its own entrance. And overall, like, it's crazy because obviously at this point, this is a Hell in a Cell match, like, in the, like, quote unquote PG era. So they're, like, most of the time you'd be, like, expecting blood. But for I could say this is, like, the best Hell in a Cell match that doesn't incorporate blood at all. So you have great storytellers like Triple H and Undertaker, and then Shawn Michaels, like that moment there. And we all popped huge of when Shawn Michaels super kicks the Undertaker, goes for a pedigree, 1, 2, kick out. We thought the streak was over there for the most part. And, like, that match easily is once again in my top 10 favorite, maybe even up in the top 5 favorite matches of all time. This was also the WrestleMania with CM Punk versus Chris Jericho for the WWE Championship, but then the main event was, at the time, advertised as once in a lifetime, Rock versus Cena, which in my mind, because like growing up as a Rock fan, I love the idea that The Rock actually won this match instead of Cena, because I think we were all thinking Cena was going to win because like we didn't think Rock was coming back and doing a whole thing for the next year. I was so satisfied with this WrestleMania. Like, it was so good and so amazing compared to the prior year.
Yeah, this was a pretty fun WrestleMania. And of course, us all watching it together was really cool. And let's just get right into it with the Triple H and Undertaker match. I mean, insane. Like, I don't know if Undertaker's streak, in my mind, I think should have ever been broken, but if it should have been broken, it should have been broken in that match. Shawn Michaels, Triple H, Triple H. How do you beat them every single time? Crazy. And it was maybe the closest match I've ever seen. It was just insane. The way that it was done in the Hell in a Cell, which makes sense. You got Shawn Michaels as the special guest referee. Just an amazing match. And like DK said, being one of his top 5 potentially favorite matches definitely says a lot. But yeah, this was a really fun WrestleMania. I did mark out pretty huge when Sheamus had won the match with Daniel Bryan so quickly, and we didn't even get to watch it live, which was hilarious because there was issues with the cable box. And then, yeah, I don't know, this was just a really fun WrestleMania with good memories behind it too.
Next up is WrestleMania 29, April 7th, 2013 at MetLife Stadium in East Rutherford, New Jersey. So this was the WrestleMania we had twice in a lifetime. It was Rock versus John Cena, this time for the WWE Championship. I believe the world title match, there was Alberto Del Rio and Jack Swagger. This also had the match, this what I feel like would be the last great Undertaker WrestleMania. Well, okay, there may be one more great WrestleMania match for Undertaker. We'll get into that later on, but with CM Punk. So this WrestleMania was not too bad. It wasn't as exciting as WrestleMania 28, but still had some pretty cool matches. Brock Lesnar versus Triple H. I guess that was kind of a highlight also of WrestleMania 29, but no, like better than 27, not better than 28.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I find this one, yeah, a little lackluster. It's just, there's not a ton of memorable moments from this one. I mean, CM Punk and Taker is really good, but Taker can't just carry every WrestleMania, it seems, that isn't good. So yeah, I don't know. This one is very forgettable to me.
WrestleMania 30 took place April 6, 2014 at the Mercedes-Benz Superdome in New Orleans, Louisiana. It might be called Silverdome by Hulk Hogan. Obviously, this is the WrestleMania where the streak ended. Brock Lesnar defeating Undertaker. This also had the match, obviously, there was the opening match, which I believe was Daniel Bryan versus Triple H. The winner gets inserted into the World Heavyweight Championship match with Batista and Randy Orton, which obviously Daniel Bryan won that and would win the main event. That's why they coined the phrase Miracle on Bourbon Street. This also had the first ever Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal. This had John Cena versus Bray Wyatt on the card. There's also had the Shield in a 6-man tag team match with New Age Outlaws and Kane. Such a random match, which actually forgot to mention Shield's debut at WrestleMania 29. Yeah, this was not too bad. Better than 29, better than 27, not as good as 28. Pretty cool way to celebrate 30 years of WrestleMania at this point.
Yeah, 30's pretty solid. I mean, Taker losing the streak is crazy. I don't think any of us really expected it. Brock Lesnar being the guy to do it, I was so mad, and I still kind of am. I don't think he needed that. And of course, like the opening with Stone Cold, The Rock, and Hogan was really cool to see these three faces that were so prominent throughout the WrestleManias leading up to the biggest one at the time being WrestleMania 30. So yeah, overall, this Mania was pretty solid, but yeah, I would say probably not better than 28, which was just 2 WrestleManias prior.
Next up is WrestleMania 31, took place March 29th, 2015 at Levi Stadium in Santa Clara, California. This was a WrestleMania where we thought it was going to be absolute garbage when we saw the buildup, but ended up turning out pretty good, actually. Like, it exceeded our expectations. This had that ladder match that had Daniel Bryan win the Intercontinental Championship. Sting versus Triple H happened at this event, which we all thought that Sting was going to win, but it ended up being Triple H. John Cena wrestled Rusev, where Rusev had that really awesome entrance coming out in the tank. This was for the US title. I can't think of, besides obviously the main event being Roman Reigns versus Brock Lesnar for the WWE Championship, which ended up being saved with Seth Rollins' Money in the Bank cash-in, the heist of the century, as they coin phrase it now, with Seth Rollins walking out as the WWE Champion, which actually, that also reminds me, that's another match, the opening match, Seth Rollins versus Randy Orton, where we had the famous curb stomp into the RKO that we see nowadays as one of the best RKOs performed. So yeah, you know what? A very underrated underrated WrestleMania and one that exceeded expectations.
Yeah, I would definitely have to agree with that. It definitely, I was not very excited for this WrestleMania, but it did end up turning out very good. And the cash in with Seth Rollins is one of the best cash ins easily. I mean, him running down that huge aisle to get to the ring and cashing in, and just, I feel like it was super unexpected. I don't think a lot of people really seen that one coming, which I guess is why it was coined like the heist of the century. And being able to escape Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar is definitely pretty crazy. So yeah, overall, not really a bad WrestleMania at all.
Next up is WrestleMania 32, April 3rd, 2016 at AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas. This had the main event be Roman Reigns versus Triple H for the WWE Championship, Undertaker versus Shane McMahon in Hell in a Cell, the 6-second match with The Rock and Eric Rowan for this match, the ladder match for the Intercontinental Championship. There's a handicap match with New Day and League of Nations, the triple threat women's title match, which was the match of the night with Becky Lynch, Charlotte Flair, and Sasha Banks. Another WrestleMania where I feel like I should remember all the matches because I just recently did an episode on Pro Wrestling What If based off of this WrestleMania. A WrestleMania that we thought was going to be a fucking clinical because of the star-studded roster we had, especially another match I can mention, Chris Jericho versus AJ Styles. AJ Styles coming in the company at Royal Rumble, having all this star-studded roster come in and basically participate at this WrestleMania. However, those injuries occurred where a lot of guys couldn't, like John Cena, Seth Rollins, Randy Orton, even Sting. So all those guys couldn't, so they had to really scramble and come up with a somewhat decent WrestleMania for one that they claim was 100,000, but I think it was admitted later that they counted like employees of the arena to do that. It had its moments, but looking back at it, it's like, it's definitely a big what if, how this WrestleMania would have been had those stars not gotten injured. It ended up being very lackluster.
Yeah, I feel like with this WrestleMania, it is definitely a big what if, and I actually haven't even watched that episode yet, so I will have to go do that. But it really is that. If there wasn't those injuries, this could have been a wicked WrestleMania, and it was okay, I guess. It wasn't necessarily terrible in my mind, but it is just, it's just an unfortunate situation where you have these guys that could have participated, but don't get the chance to do so.
WrestleMania 33, April 2nd, 2017 at Camping World Stadium, which that was the Citrus Bowl previously, in Orlando, Florida. This was main evented by Roman Reigns versus The Undertaker, which kind of saw what we thought at first was going to be the retirement match because we had that like kind of send off to end it off. There was also Goldberg versus Brock Lesnar for the Universal Championship, Randy Orton versus Bray Wyatt for the WWE Championship with the whole like projection of like the worms in the ring, which was stupid. This also had the mixed tag match with John Cena and Nikki Bella versus The Miz and Maurice. There was also, the beginning match, which was a match that exceeded a lot of our expectations. AJ Styles versus Shane McMahon. A lot of people really enjoyed that match. And there was also Chris Jericho versus Kevin Owens, which we all thought was going to be for the Universal title until Kevin Owens dropped it to Goldberg at the prior pay-per-view. And then it just ended up being for the US title that Kevin Owens ended up winning from Chris Jericho, even though like the biggest story going into that was the whole festival of friendship. But yeah, this is also kind of one of those manias that I feel like if they tweaked a couple of booking decisions, this could have been a great WrestleMania, but it kind of fell flat a little bit.
Yeah, I think you summed it up pretty well with that. Like it's another one of those ones where yeah, a couple things could have been tweaked. There were some that like some of the matches seemed like they could have been good and then they just weren't. I mean, Oldberg being in the company and being the Universal Champion, right? Yeah, like that is just a little bit ridiculous. I mean, I loved Goldberg throughout his career, especially when I was a young boy, but I don't think he should have been in that position. And I do think that like it would have been a better spot for Kevin Owens to be with that title. And I don't know, it's just ridiculous.
WrestleMania 34 took place April 8th, 2018 at the Mercedes-Benz Superdome in New Orleans, Louisiana, same place that WrestleMania 30 took place. This was also kind of a very lackluster WrestleMania. Main event was Roman Reigns versus Brock Lesnar for the Universal Championship, which saw Brock Lesnar retain, which no one really wanted to see. They didn't really want to see Roman, but at least at this time, Roman was a full-time competitor unlike Brock, but I think they were doing that so that Brock can break CM Punk's 434-day record at that point. This was also the WrestleMania with AJ Styles versus Shinsuke Nakamura, which had a weird ending to it. The highlight of this show was the mixed tag match with Kurt Angle and Ronda Rousey versus Triple H and Stephanie McMahon. This was also, now as I'm remembering this, the WrestleMania where Braun Strowman and 10-year-old Nicholas win the tag team championships from the Bar. And there's probably some other matches for some reason that I can't think of off the top of my head. But yeah, this wasn't really all that good in my opinion. Oh, yeah, this is also the WrestleMania where they decided that Asuka wins the Rumble a few months prior, challenges Charlotte Flair, and her streak ends. I just think that was a dumb decision. Asuka should have won at that point. But yeah, like the highlight was that mixed tag match. And actually, I think that was the longest match on the card too, was that mixed tag match. So that was a highlight. But yeah, once again, we're on like a 3-year stretch, including 33 and 32 of like very lackluster WrestleManias.
Yeah, this Mania was pretty mid. The mixed tag match was pretty solid. I did enjoy that match. And then, of course, with Strowman and Nicholas winning the tag titles, that really rubbed me the wrong way. Of course, I was a big fan of Sheamus around this time, and I loved the Bar. That tag team was wicked. They were definitely like huge competitors for the tag belts. So seeing that happen that way, just it really kind of grinded my gears, and it really made me not happy with that WrestleMania, honestly.
Next up is WrestleMania 35, April 7th, 2019 at MetLife Stadium in East Rutherford, New Jersey, same venue that 29 took place at. Main event was the first ever women's main event with Becky Lynch, Charlotte Flair, and Ronda Rousey. Winner takes all for the Raw and SmackDown Women's Championships. We had Seth Rollins and Brock Lesnar kick off the show for the Universal Championship, which saw Seth Rollins win. We saw the crowning of Kofi Mania with Kofi Kingston against Daniel Bryan, which was really cool. This WrestleMania also had actually Randy Orton versus AJ Styles, which I don't think it was their best match against each other. I think like those early SmackDown matches from like when the brand split came back were really good, but like that was still really cool to see as a because it definitely screams out a WrestleMania like marquee match. This was also Kurt Angle's retirement match, which was unfortunately against Baron Corbin of all people. And I know there's definitely other matches that I can't think of off the top of my head. Oh, Roman Reigns had came back around this time because of his leukemia and faced Drew McIntyre. Overall, I do think it was better than 34, that's for sure. But like this was also the WrestleMania that I remember. I think you were over, Robbie was over, and a couple of other people, and thinking, why is this so fucking long? Like it was ridiculously long. I don't know if you guys heard that, but he said that's what she said. This was the WrestleMania that I'm glad the following year after, and up until today, that there's now 2 nights of WrestleMania instead of one night where the pre-show starts at like 5 p.m. Eastern and ends at like 1 in the morning. I was so exhausted.
Yeah, I remember being over at your house for this one, and I remember like sitting on the couch and like trying to keep my eyes open because it just felt like it was going on forever, and I was getting so tired, but I wanted to watch it because of course you're trying to build up for that main event. And I think I ended up leaving like right before the main event, didn't I?
I don't remember.
I think I did. I think like it was either I was leaving or like I was like getting ready to leave during the main event because I wanted to be out that door and go to bed. But yeah, it was kind of a forgettable Mania, but at the same time, there was some good parts to it, and I definitely enjoyed watching it. But yeah, it felt so long. So it is great that Mania is 2 nights now, which I thought was so weird when it first happened. But looking back on it, it definitely needs to be when they're going to put on that many matches, and like you can't keep people there for like 9 hours in like these places to watch live events. That's just ridiculous.
Yeah, I'd rather watch WrestleMania in 2 days with 4 hours each instead of 9 hours in one. Like that was too much. But going into WrestleMania 36, which no one added on their bingo card, that WrestleMania 36 happening April 4th and 5th, 2020 at the WWE Performance Center in Orlando, Florida, in front of a total jam-packed crowd of 0 in attendance because of the pandemic. And yeah, this really was a huge swerve. There was actually once again, I covered a Pro Wrestling What If episode about what would happen if there was fans at WrestleMania 36, and especially the matches we could have had and were originally booked but were canceled. But for what they did, and especially imagine a lifetime where we never got those cinematic matches of the Boneyard match, which that was what I was referring to earlier about like one last Undertaker great match with AJ Styles, that being a cinematic match and like him riding off into the darkness after he won his match to Metallica. That would have been awesome. The Firefly Funhouse match with John Cena and Bray Wyatt was insane. There was also Brock Lesnar versus Drew McIntyre, since Drew won the Royal Rumble. That was for the WWE title. We had Braun Strowman versus Goldberg in a 2-minute squash. Well, not really a squash match, but more of a finisher fest. This also had the first match of Rhea Ripley versus Charlotte Flair. This was for the NXT Women's Championship. Becky and Shayna for the Raw Women's Championship. There was also Sami Zayn versus Daniel Bryan for the Intercontinental Championship. There were some matches that I remember, but yeah, like it kind of is a forgettable WrestleMania that we kind of want to forget because there was no fans in attendance. And even though we do like to watch wrestling, sometimes the reason why WrestleMania matches are great because of the crowd reaction. Huge example, Rock versus Hogan.
Yeah, this is a weird one, and it's unfortunate because, of course, there's nothing that you can do to change the way that things went with this one. And I remember trying to watch it and my internet being so crappy that I could barely like get to watch it at all. It was so choppy and it really sucked. But overall, I don't think it was like the worst. It's just they're doing the best with what they could do. Like they say, like the show must go on, and it did. Overall, that's going to be one of those WrestleManias that people remember because of the situation that they were put in.
Next up is WrestleMania 37, which happened April 10th and April 11th, 2021 at Raymond James Stadium in Tampa, Florida, which was actually going to be the original venue that 36 would have taken place in had the pandemic not happened. The main event of night one was Bianca Belair and Sasha Banks for the SmackDown Women's Championship, which was amazing. This was the first time we also seen Bad Bunny in the ring and exceeded our expectations in that tag match with Damian Priest against Miz and John Morrison. The opener of night one was Bobby Lashley versus Drew McIntyre for the WWE Championship. For night two, the main event was Daniel Bryan, Edge, and Roman Reigns for the Universal Championship. You had like that moment of like Roman Reigns stacking both guys and pinning them, which was badass. Rhea Ripley versus Asuka for the Raw Women's Championship. It was great to see WrestleMania this time around, once again with fans. Not an entire like 60 to 70K arena for both nights, but about half of that because of restrictions. But at least there were fans with, I believe some of them had cardboard cutouts beside.
Yeah, the cardboard cutouts was hilarious, but it was great to see fans back in attendance for a WrestleMania. And I think the biggest part of this WrestleMania, because this one, I kind of do forget a lot about this. Bianca is amazing, one of my favorite women's superstars of all time. But seeing the Miz and John Morrison, the dirt sheet back together was so cool. So that was really awesome that they kind of got a moment at WrestleMania together.
WrestleMania 38 took place April 2nd and 3rd, 2022 at AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas, the same venue that WrestleMania 32 happened in, where they were expecting 100,000, but I think in this case they didn't even have 100,000. So this WrestleMania, the main event of night one, was the match that technically was advertised not as a match, but ended up becoming one, where it was Kevin Owens versus Stone Cold Steve Austin. We saw Stone Cold come back. There was also for night one, Charlotte Flair versus Ronda Rousey. Ronda had won the 2022 Women's Royal Rumble, so she chose Charlotte for her match. This was also the night where Seth Rollins had a mystery opponent, and it was the return of Cody Rhodes. And little did we know, we all thought we were expecting the huge smoke and mirrors, but he came back with Kingdom by Downstate and did his whole American Nightmare persona he had been using since leaving WWE. Basically what you would have already seen like weeks prior on AEW come to WWE, like if it was like an AEW WWE invasion. That was such a great moment. And little did we know, or maybe we kind of knew at this point, that like Cody Rhodes would just end up being a main event player and main event like the next couple of WrestleManias right after. So that match was absolutely awesome. For night two, it was that stupid unification match. Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar, WWE title, Universal title, winner takes all. We weren't excited because both wrestlers at this point, I believe, were part-time wrestlers. There was also Sami Zayn versus Johnny Knoxville, which was a very fun match. And then there was also Bianca Belair versus Becky Lynch for the Raw Women's Championship, which was a banger of a match. And there's some that for some reason I'm not. Oh, yeah. I wish I didn't even remember about that match. Pat McAfee and Austin Theory that ended up turning into Pat McAfee versus Vince McMahon. No one wants to see wrinkly muscle McMahon in his 70s in a match at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much to say about this Mania, but Cody coming back was just amazing, and he's been really, really awesome in WWE right now. So it's cool, like you said, like it does almost feel like an Invasion Part 2 where Cody comes back. So that's great that we kind of get to relive something like that now in this era of wrestling, which is really just super interesting. But yeah, I don't really remember like a lot of these matches. I don't think I actually watched the pay-per-view for this one. It was the first Mania that I hadn't watched on pay-per-view in a while. I just watched like highlights afterwards the next day. So I don't really have too much of an opinion of this one.
And then the last WrestleMania that has happened that we're talking about, it's WrestleMania 39, April 1st and 2nd, 2023 at SoFi Stadium in Inglewood, California. Yeah, this was technically kind of the first WrestleMania with Triple H and creative for the most part. So it ended up being really good with like night one, we had Rhea Ripley versus Charlotte Flair, which was amazing of a match. We had Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn versus the Usos for the tag titles as the main event, which storyline purposes, glad that was the main event. Yeah, overall, this was a pretty great WrestleMania. We had the triple threat match on night 2 with Gunther, Sheamus, and Drew McIntyre for the IC title. Cody versus Roman, which ended up with Roman winning. And there is the clip of like the rubber chicken going into the ring, which was hilarious. Yeah, a lot of people were pissed to see Roman Reigns win and Cody not finishing the story at this point. Of course, they were doing that because Roman was about to hit 1,000 days as champion. Overall, I was really satisfied with this WrestleMania after seeing what had occurred with like the prior years WrestleManias, especially as of the last couple of years prior with like under the Vince McMahon regime.
Yeah, this was a really good WrestleMania. I didn't watch night 1, but I did get to watch night 2 live. Which was nice. And yeah, that triple threat match for the IC title was wicked. I wanted to see Sheamus win. Of course, Sheamus has been my guy throughout his career, but it's undeniable that Gunther is amazing. And I do really like him as the IC champion and the longest reigning. So that's really, really cool. And then, of course, Cody losing. It was kind of expected because you kind of thought that Roman was going to win that match. But at the same time, you got, no pun intended, but you got a dream that Cody was going to win. Maybe we will see that eventually, but unfortunately, yeah, that's the way that went. But though I didn't get to watch night 1 as it was playing out, watching the highlights back, night 1 was definitely really cool with some of those matches that were really, really great.
All right, so we wanted to end this off on a pretty cool note. We have comprised of a top 5 list of our favorite WrestleManias. And this is basically going to be no particular order. I think I did put mine in a particular order, but I'm not really even confident on this particular order. But I'll just say the first one I'll mention is WrestleMania 20. I think that was a banger WrestleMania with a lot of banger matches. One that I remember as one of the first WrestleManias that I'd seen in my childhood. Lots of matches I mentioned, like the triple threat match for the World Heavyweight title, the WWE title match with Guerrero and Angle, the return of the Dead Man, Rocket Sock versus Evolution. And then especially you can't deny of also something we didn't talk about while talking about WrestleMania 20 is that ending moment of the celebration with Guerrero and Benoit hugging each other, and both these guys who were claimed as undersized superstars by management finishing off WrestleMania as the top champions of the company. It was a great moment for WrestleMania. The next one I put down was WrestleMania 17. I think this is one that like I mentioned, like a lot of people do say it is the best WrestleMania, even though I disagree that I don't think it's entirely the best. I do have to agree that it is one of the best. There was a lot of cool matches, even the ones that weren't the marquee matches, like I mentioned, like the hardcore title triple threat match was a very fun match. Overall, a lot of the match quality, especially TLC 2 that stole the show, was just absolutely amazing with this WrestleMania. WrestleMania 18, the year after, was a really awesome WrestleMania, the first one that I ever seen. So I had a lot of sentimental value, which is why it goes into this, even though a lot of people would think it's like at least in a top 10 or maybe in the mid tier at this point with 40 different WrestleManias, but in my heart, it's in a top 5 list because it was the first one that I ever seen. Then I put down WrestleMania 28. We kept putting this one over. So many cool matches, end of an era, especially we didn't really talk about like the ending of like all 3 of the guys at the ramp there, kind of signaling the end of the era. There wasn't really any bad things in my opinion with that Mania. And then the last one, WrestleMania 19. I think 19, which came after obviously 18 and before 20. So you had a 4-year stretch in my list of 17 to 20. And then WrestleMania 28. 19 was awesome with the jam-packed matches that were on the card. There were some bugaboos, obviously, like I mentioned earlier. Match quality-wise was really great. So I really enjoyed these 5 WrestleManias that I talked about.
So my list of WrestleManias is going to be kind of controversial for people, but these are just ones that I really enjoyed. And unfortunately, I didn't put 28 on my list, though. That would probably be definitely in the top 10. But the first one I have is Mania 21. This was a really good one. I mean, there's a lot of standout moments, of course. Cena winning the US title is huge. There was even a video game, which I believe was...
Cena won the WWE title at 20. Unless you're talking about 20.
Maybe I'm talking about 20 then.
Okay, well, continue what you're going to say, and maybe...
No. I am talking about 21. I don't know why I said United States title. WWE title. John Cena wins it. And then there was even a video game made about WrestleMania 21, and I believe it was like Xbox exclusive. That's a pretty fun game. I used to play the hell out of that. Of course, Edge winning the Money in the Bank ladder match, the first one ever, is definitely near and dear to me, with Edge being my favorite superstar. Then I have WrestleMania 18. It's no denying this is a lot of people's favorites, I think. I mean, right in the heart of the Attitude Era, and just a lot of really cool stuff, of course. Taker and Flair, that's a really cool match, with Flair being one of the people that Taker ends up defeating in the streak is just so cool. Triple H and Jericho, really great as well. And then, of course, the big one with Icon versus Icon, Rock versus Hogan, which is one of the greatest WrestleMania moments ever. Then I have WrestleMania 24, which was a weird outlier, but I feel like it's mostly because of Edge facing Taker, and of course losing to Taker at Mania was a really cool one for me. But then Shawn versus Ric Flair, that is just one of the moments that stands out for me in wrestling, where if I'm talking about wrestling to someone who doesn't know about wrestling, I normally bring up the I love you, I'm sorry thing and the super kick, and how emotional it was for literally any wrestling fan. I knew I had to include some kind of old school WrestleMania in this, and I felt like the best one to pick was WrestleMania 3. I mean, Hogan versus Andre, the most iconic thing in wrestling is that body slam, I feel. So you got to talk about it. And then, of course, with Macho Man and Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, that is an amazing match that I feel like you can watch so many times over and not really get bored of that match. And then, of course, I've said it many times, my favorite WrestleMania of all time being WrestleMania 22. I know a lot of people don't really like that WrestleMania very much, but it has a lot of sentimental value to me, and I feel like a lot of the matches were pretty solid. Like I said, that Money in the Bank was so cool. The different guys that were in that Money in the Bank match with, like I said, with Ric Flair and Finlay being two older guys, Bobby Lashley being the kind of bigger guy in that match. And then RVD ended up coming out on top, and that created the ECW One Night Stand #2, where RVD would go on to defeat John Cena for the WWE Championship. I feel like that was just a huge moment and a huge Money in the Bank match to win for the history of that briefcase, I guess. And then Edge and Mick Foley, one of my favorite matches of all time. There were so many different weird little stunts that happened, like Edge going for the spear on Mick Foley, and then him like opening up his shirt and having barbed wire wrapped around his abdomen because he knew eventually he was probably going to get speared. There was thumbtacks in that match, and of course the flaming table spot to finish off the match. And then John Cena versus Triple H, that was a pretty good match too. I enjoyed that, and I just overall that has got to be my favorite WrestleMania.
Anyways, guys, that is going to be the end of this edition of a Funko POPcast. If you enjoy this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let us know your favorite WrestleManias that have happened, and we hope to see you guys on another edition of a Funko POPcast. 1, 2, 3, I'm out of here.
Peace in, peace out.